Friends, today's NRI Summer program from Los Angeles brought to you commercial free by listeners like you. Your generous donations make possible for us to stay commercial free, and today's show is pre-recorded. If you have a question for the guest, please send an email to nrisummer@gmail.com. We will follow up with the guest and find the answer for you. Thank you for your support.
Namaste friends, welcome to NRI Summer Shows. I am Tejaswini, your today's host. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr.Aseem Shrivastava, who is an environmental economist and author of The Churning of the Earth and Making the Global India. Welcome to our show, Mr. Aseem. So how are you finding yourself in your ongoing lecture series across the globe on various socio-economical and environmental issues?
Well, it's actually I came for a conference to North Carolina, and the conference was about the teaching of India in the U.S. And it didn't make sense to come for 3 or 4 days. So then I extended it to a book tour and a lecture tour, and I've been talking about our book and related research. So I've finished my U.S. leg of the visit, and now I'm going to the U.K. for 2 weeks before I go to India. I've spoken at about a dozen odd campuses in the U.S. and, discussing both the, ongoing economic crisis in India as well as its ecological implications, the growth of the last 20 years and what it means for the environment, and, what does the future look like. So there's been good response. There's been a lot of interest and curiosity. And I've been surprised to find that actually many people have got hold of our book, which is not easy to find in the U.S., and they've actually read it. So I'm reasonably satisfied.
That's great. So, you have completed US and you are going to UK. And did you finish your Canada tour also?
No, I'm not going to Canada.
Okay, because you have lectured in so many different cities and with the different kinds of audience. So how are the audience different from India, or from audience different from each other in different cities? How are they receiving the lectures on the globalization or the environmental changes that you're talking about?
Well, the bulk of the audience has actually been Indians in America. There have been Americans as well in many cases because it's been university campuses. Much of the time, the organization of the lectures has been done by Indian students or faculty on different campuses. And naturally, given the focus of the lectures, which is Indian globalization, most people attending the talks have been Indian. There have been some American students and faculty as well from time to time. Most of them have been quite well informed actually about what's going on, and their questions seem to indicate that they're well aware of things. But of course, detailed knowledge of ground realities is not there. So in comparison to India, the questions are quite different because in India I've mostly lectured to activist groups or also at institutions like IIM and others, but the questions are more grounded in what is going on a day-to-day level rather than on aggregate figures and so on. So it's a more academic sort of audience that I've been speaking to here in the U.S.
For different people, or is it everybody is receiving it the same way?
No, of course, different people understand different things from it. I think that what I try to emphasize in my talks is that globalization, is as understood by ordinary people, the general public, is quite a bit different from globalization as economists understand it. and in particular the integration of international trade in goods and services, of investment, direct investment, as well as finance. So three different things are involved in globalization as far as economists are concerned, and they all three have multiple implications for economy and ecology. What the common understanding is about globalization concerns more the fact that you have satellite television and you have access to the internet and you have mobile technologies. So the world is a lot more wired. Global trends and fashions carry over from one country and culture to another instantaneously. Those are the things that people understand from globalization. Whereas, I think we need a more rigorous understanding of what it entails. And in our book, we focus on the impact on economy and ecology, not as much on culture. Whereas, I think we need a more rigorous understanding of what it entails. And in our book, we focus on the impact on economy and ecology, not as much on culture.
Okay. So,
can you emphasize on this rigorous idea that you were talking about?
Well, there was a time when the world was not quite as globalized. There is a popular view, and sometimes economists also hold the same view, that the world has never been anything but globalized. It's always been one world. But that is sort of naive, because I think in the last generation, the extent to which the world has got integrated through the different markets is hugely greater. And in particular, financial globalization, the fact that financial markets are interlinked around the world, and something that happens in a monetary policy announcement by the Federal Reserve in the U.S. Making an impact on global financial markets, and through that immediately affecting the Indian financial markets, that is a new phenomena. It just simply did not exist a generation ago. So that's the sense in which I think a somewhat deeper understanding of the way globalization has been working is important, and there's a lot to think about there.
Okay. So the term globalization, it was like previously, like few years back, like in few generations back, especially in India, it was taken more positively. Like it is coined as another word for development. But whereas now, like after a few generations, the people in the India, they are taking it negatively. Like whatever, like as you mentioned, like the rupee crisis that we have recently seen, or any other financial crisis or anything like that, they are directly impacting on the Indian economy. So it's like, isn't there a difference in the people's perceptions and the actual globalization?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we've had since 1947 in India is not globalization. We had a version of economic development till 1991, and after that, another version of development, but this time under globalization. And the impact on society, economy, ecology is quite different in the two periods. A lot of the ecological impact, for instance, in the early period has become greatly aggravated and accelerated in the second period after 1991. And, the way people understand globalization has been changing recently because of the events related to global finance. And people are beginning to realize that there are severe downsides to globalization for a country which is vulnerable, and India is very vulnerable in the present world economy. So, nobody expected when reforms began in the early 90s outside the economics profession, certainly. Nobody expected that this much inflation, this much unemployment, this much decline in the value of the rupee, all this would happen on account of globalization, but it has.
Right.
So it has definitely sobered people's understanding, but I think a lot of the causes and a lot of the roots of the problems in the policies that are in place is not quite as well understood.
Right. So yeah, there is in the 1950s or the pre-independence era, the rupee and the dollar were almost equal. There is no major difference. But recently we have seen the rupee has fallen completely, and it is it was in a crisis. It's because of the globalization, I should say. And how do you suggest? What do you suggest? What do you think is the best thing that we can do in India, not to fall for such kind of a pitfall in future?
See, there's no simple answer to that question. I mean, there is a whole policy framework in place because of which, the problems are arising. And it's important to understand what that framework involves and, how much of vulnerability India has developed to global financial economies and trends as a result of, those policies. So, one can talk about new policies and a new policy framework, but, new policies will require policy space. Something will have to give way at the center to make way for new policies. I mean, for instance, the decline in the value of the rupee, which you just talked about.
Yeah.
Now, as long as your imports are going to be growing far faster than your exports are, your trade gap is going to go on increasing. So you will constantly need more hard currency to finance your deficit. As long as that is the case, you will be interested in getting as much investment from abroad as possible. If that investment begins to recede for some reason, which may not be in your power to control, for instance, in the recent events, the change in the monetary policy of the Fed in the U.S. Brought about a receding of investment from India. When that happens, then, in the context in which India is, which is that we have high trade deficits, the rupee begins to fall. Now, you can't correct this in any simple way, in the long term, because the causes of it are structural. I mean, the RBI can do a handful of things. Finance ministry can try a few things, but basically, the deep structural reasons why the rupee is so vulnerable to international finance, those reasons are, not being changed.
Right.
So what we argue in the book is that, we need a different policy framework which secures the Indian economy much better. And that requires new ideas, new discussions, and that's not really happening.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So, coming back to the context of the environment and the societal changes, agriculture, it has been the backbone for all these years, and it is the major political agenda for all the current political parties. So, and the agriculture, which it employs more than 50% of the Indian population, and it is currently on the verge of bankruptcy. And it's many of the people, apart from the social activists and the real farmers, nobody is paying so much attention except for the hype and drama or the debates, the ongoing debates. So is it because of that this kind of drag in the fall in the agriculture, is it because of the perception that India's growth rate is uniform for people from all walks of life, or what do you think it is because of, what is the cause for it?
See, the decline of agriculture is a complex topic, and it has been going on for at least half a generation, if not a full generation. I would say since the mid to late 1980s, you see Indian agriculture declining. And what does that mean? It does not mean that production has been declining. Overall production has actually been rising, but not rising fast enough. Per capita availability of food and especially cereals and pulses has been either stagnant or declining in most parts of India. What it does mean is that farmers, and especially small marginal farmers and mid-sized farmers, they have suffered. And that is best exemplified in the 250,000 farmer suicides since 1997. Now, if you trace the suicides, they're actually the causes of the suicides are to be located in growing debt that small and marginal farmers have, and the debt has been on account of their rising costs, the cost of inputs, and not rising prices of their output. A lot of the reason for this is to be found in the agreement on agriculture that India signed at the WTO in 1997, and which invited large corporations and agribusinesses, among other things. It invited them to invest in agriculture in India, in seeds and so on. If a farmer has to buy seeds every year from Monsanto or some, franchisee of Monsanto, and, is not allowed to recycle seeds, then his costs are going to be greater. And if the cost of seeds rises, then again his costs will rise. And then there are things like, diesel prices, which have been rising. And so the rising cost of inputs has squeezed the farmer out.
Right.
And agricultural policies in India have not taken good care of farmers. Agriculture remains a neglected sector by and large. You can see evidence of this even in the case of decline in public investment in irrigation. More than half of Indian agriculture is still rain-fed, and which means productivity is not growing or not growing as fast as it needs to. So there's a lot of complex reasons why agriculture has suffered so much, and its contribution to GDP is much lower than it was in 1991 in relative terms. Also, agriculture never has the autonomy that, say, industry has in terms of setting its own prices. The farmers are always at the mercy of either the local moneylender or the local trader or state government or national government or the WTO when it comes to accepting prices for their products. And that is not the case with industrial products, where manufacturers and sellers have some say in the price at which their output is sold. So agriculture has remained discriminated against the world over, and India is, only one more example of that. The difference, of course, is that in India, the destiny of 2/3 of the country rests on the fortunes of agriculture. So if you neglect agriculture, you pretty much neglect more than, 60% of your people.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, so you were talking about the corporatization of the agriculture in the recent days, and that is and the impacts of that. So it's like, is this corporatization of the agriculture is the result of the globalization or on the global market, or is it just the socio-economical changes that will happen from generation to generation?
No, obviously it's related to globalization, and the fact that the Indian governments have always welcomed multinational investment in India in the last 20 years. And like I said earlier, the reason for the interest in investment is that India needs badly the hard currency to pay for its excess imports. So the encouragement given to agribusiness in order to invest in Indian agriculture, that is a function of that. And, that sort of corporatization has happened only in the last 20 years. And it's very much, a sign of other things that are going wrong with the way the policy framework has been created.
It's like it's not the corporatization of the agriculture that we are talking about, or the globalization impacts that we are facing today in the country is not just because of the social and the human perceptions that have changed from the generation to generation, but it is because of the political reforms, or the political majorly because of the political changes that has happened in the country, and which has allowed globalization and westernization in the country to this vast extent. Am I clear this time?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's not, if you're asking me if the changes are led by domestic changes, transformation, or is it coming from outside, I would say it's mostly coming from outside, but the choice of what we take from outside is ours, and what we reject is also ours. The fact that we have uncritically adopted a set of policies without examining their domestic impact, that's where the problem lies. And that's where the politics of, the last 20 years, it has been, flawed.
Yeah, that's true. It's like it's not just they have come into our country, but like we as the people, we have welcomed them, and we have accepted the changes. That is because it is the reason behind the current day's phenomenon.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so it's like, what are you doing to?
Obviously, what you're doing is to raise your concerns on these issues, but do the people who call the shots pay any attention to these, or have you made any efforts in that direction, like to bring the social awareness on all these issues?
Well, I'm just a writer and an economist.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not basically an activist, and I think that our job is to observe what is going on, to report it as accurately, and try to understand the phenomena, and identify the problems and locate their causes, and if possible, prescribe something by way of an approach, or what they call nowadays solutions, which is not often solutions. So, I've been writing, I've been, doing a lot of public speaking, public education, teaching occasionally courses, which, bring these concerns to public attention.
Yeah, what I mean is like apart from that. So, it's like, is there anything that like we as a citizens can do, something like to change these negative impacts, or become stronger to face the future impacts, or anything like that? It's like something that we can do to protect our environment. Is it even possible?
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course it's possible, which is why one, speaks at all, and which is why one writes or says anything in public. I mean, I think that citizens have a huge responsibility if democracy is to survive in a real sense. And, the first job is to get properly educated. I don't mean by that just go to school and college, but to actually concern yourself with public affairs and to inform yourself of what is going on, and to try your best to understand what is happening. And, try to, as I said earlier, locate causes and, to see who is responsible. And then, I think, there are, institutions and, movements and organizations through which one can propose changes and one can suggest this should be done or that should be done. But before that, I think it's important to be properly informed and to be able to reason about policies in a rational way. So, that's where I see my role or role of people like me. A lot has to be done by way of public action. In the context of environment, for instance, since you asked about what can be done in relation to environment, a lot can be done, and a lot is being done also. I think that there are movements at work in India which are resisting the invasion of development projects which are harmful to local communities and the environment. And in places like Jharkhand, for instance, in eastern India, more than 100 projects which the government has signed since the time it was created, since the time Jharkhand was created in 2000, have been stopped. They are not proceeding. And that sort of an impasse indicates that government is planning things at some great variance from popular needs and popular demands. So people are already acting, have been acting. Similarly, in Odisha, you might have read recently, there was a public hearing on the Niyamgiri project of Vedanta in August, in which there were a dozen villages who went through the public hearing process, the orders of the court, and they all voted against the project, and the project is scrapped as far as the Indian legal system goes. So that sort of activism is already happening and is often succeeding. So citizens can do a lot, but for them to be able to do these things, it has taken a lot of work by way of gathering information, research, analysis, proposing changes, filing petitions in courts, getting orders, from the court, etc. Working with the media, issuing press releases. So there's whole bunches of these things that people are doing across the country. And, from the outside, if you live abroad, I think there's a lot of things that can be done. One is to find out what is going on and to report on it as accurately as possible. Second is, wherever there are problems, try to locate the causes and the people responsible, or the institutions or policies responsible. And thirdly, try to identify people in India who are working at trying to tackle these problems. And then, wherever possible, support them either through, information or through, resources or through political support, etc. So all that can be done and has been done very often to make things happen.
Right. So the first step towards the change and a sustainable environment is bringing awareness and learning and doing research at personal levels to understand what is happening around us. So so we all know that you're a writer, of the famous book Churning of the Earth, and you're an environmental economist. But can you tell us more about yourself, more about your background?
Well, I'm trained as an economist, as an environmental economist. I did my doctorate here in America at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And I taught economics for many years, both in India and in the U.S. And I've also taught philosophy at intermediate level in Norway for some years. So I have a somewhat eclectic background in economics, environment, philosophy. And in India, I've worked sometimes closely with, movements and activist groups. trying to help them understand the situation as it's developing in relation to globalization and its impacts. Those of us who have the privilege to travel, to learn from all sorts of sources, and who have access to, information, technologies, etc., we have a responsibility in society in contributing in all ways possible. So one tries to do what one can as ordinary citizen. And if one has a degree of expert knowledge from one's education, then one is obliged to share it with others. So I've tried to do that as much as possible. So I'm quite happy to go on doing my, speaking, writing, thinking about all these issues and sharing as much as possible with the public. So that's basically what I'm up to.
Great. So it's like as you teach like on the environmental and economical issues in classrooms and as well as to wider audience, it's like especially in the classroom room, like how does a student relate to the globalization or the uglier sides of the improvement in the country? Like for example, like Gujarat is being projected as a model state for the rest of the country, whereas not many people know about the acute malnutrition problems that are prevalent over there in the Human Development Index. So these are shunned as mere statistics of a one-sided report. So how does a student like react or receive like the whatever is like about the globalization?
There's no standard way in which students react. Students react very differently in different places and according to how much information they have and how much training they've received in advance and so on.
Yeah.
But one thing which one has to constantly watch out for nowadays is how much of the media perception they have absorbed, and therefore already, they might be predisposed to judging of globalization as inevitable or as, working in some people say it's like gravity and so on. And I think that's where critical intelligence is needed, but to understand, what brought it about in the first place and what keeps it in place and whose interests does it serve and whose interests it will ignore. And that's what one tries to do. For instance, you mentioned Gujarat. So Gujarat is the sort of, flagship state of India right now. It's advertised as, having double-digit growth rate and so on. Yeah. But it also has some of the worst socio-economic and environmental problems. And you have to enable students to understand that and to understand why the one thing is linked to the other, why a certain kind of growth and development strategy is going to increase inequalities, and instead of growth trickling down to the poor, it remains confined to the top and the rich get wealthier. The poor may or may not get poorer, but most of the time, the policies are indifferent to their fate. And government has to act in order to, protect the interests of the poor. Now, whether or not it actually does that is a matter of public pressure. And, if no public pressure exists on the government, it will do nothing in that direction. So, which is why a democracy is valuable. And, you can actually push and nudge the government from time to time, if not all the time, to act in a certain way.
Yeah, that's true. So in your book, you have mentioned about the idea of radical ecological democracy. So can you brief out a little more about it for our listeners here?
Yeah, well, by ecological democracy, we mean an extension and a deepening of the forms of democracy which exist today, which are quite inadequate to the needs that we are confronted with. I'll be brief here. The environment is usually understood as an afterthought, both by economists, by policymakers, as well as by the lay public. For the most part, the environment is seen as something which we will think about after we've tackled the economy and its growth and so on. And that's how market economies function. Market economies are typically not interested in solving environmental problems and actually cannot solve environmental problems. So we argue that you need a different institutional framework. The market is not only inadequate, it is harmful as a framework in which policies are, carried out. So ecological democracy would make government accountable downwards to people who are at the receiving end of environmental damage. Now, such people have a dual, place in the way I understand things. One is that they will stand for their own interests, but because they're at the receiving end of some of the worst environmental damage that is happening, and that environmental damage is something which should be a matter of concern to the whole society, not just to that community. If a rainforest is being taken away or if a coastline is being devastated, it's not just the forest dwellers and the fisher folk who live by the coastline who stand to lose. They are the short-run losers, but the long-run loser is a much larger fraction of society. So you need accountability to those communities, not just because of reasons of social justice, but also because you might think of these communities as the early warning signs of environmental crisis for a much larger fraction of society. And if you eliminate these communities, you'll have nobody to tell you that some tipping points are being crossed, some crisis points are being reached, and before you know it, some part of the country which was hitherto regarded as safe is no longer so safe, and so on. So we argue that in a three-tier system of governance, where the third tier is the district level and panchayat administration at the village level, that this third level be more empowered. For instance, in the making of laws. Now, the third level is typically an executive body. It doesn't have legislative power. What if they were to have legislative power? What kind of laws would they enact? And could they actually take better care of their own interests and wider social interest if they could enact their own laws? So that they sometimes would veto decisions taken in New Delhi or in the state capital. They might be able to stop projects legally instead of, carrying out political movements, and so on. So there's a whole set of other things which are implied in ecological democracy. For instance, the rights of communities, collective rights. The modern liberal democracy does a reasonable job of defending individual rights, but what about collective rights? So if you want to protect resources, or if you want to reduce climate change and so on, you need to expand the area of community rights, because often it's communities alone who can protect resources and not individuals. So those are some of the ideas which we try to develop in the book. There's a lot else, of course, in ecological democracy.
So it's like the uncontrolled and unregulated development. These are all the impacts of the uncontrolled and unregulated development, right? There's like, for example, the recent Uttaranchal floods, or the proposal for the Monsanto bill and the GMO foods, or all these are the current information technology movement, or any such movements, or these disasters are the results of the uncontrolled and unregulated developments. So do you think this had any impact on how we go about treating our environment? What is your take on this? What is your take as a citizen?
Well, I mean, I don't know. When events like the Uttarakhand floods happen, there is, of course, a lot of public anxiety, which is evident in its aftermath. And, for a while, it seems like the government is anxious to respond to it through, controlling growth or, controlling some economic activity, which is, at the root of some of the damage. But in India, if one watches it carefully, one finds that after a while, policies go right back to where they were, or governments go right back to where they were, and the short-term anxiety, passes on. So it remains to be seen how, the state responds to something as big as the Uttarakhand floods, in which somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 people died. It remains to be seen how many dam projects are actually cancelled, how much road construction is stopped, how much sand mining and, resort building by the rivers and so on, how much that is controlled. We will see next year at this time how, that state is doing. There are some moves to control construction and, reduce the impact on the environment. But it is early to say what is going to happen. At the same time, judging from the response to the, cyclone in Orissa, I think that some lessons are being learned by the disaster management authorities, and preemptive action can be helpful. But there are deeper reasons for why socio-economic or environmental damage happens, which are related to the, growth policies that are in place. So those reasons have to be addressed.
That's true. But the failing cyclone is the natural cyclone that has happened, like in the Orissa and the Andhra Pradesh border. It's like it doesn't. It's like though it has man-made factors, minor man-made factors. The Uttaranchal disaster, it is completely. It's like it was called the man-made disaster by the environmental activists. So okay. Please go ahead.
That is probably true, although the incidence and frequency and intensity of cyclones, hurricanes, and other natural disasters has increased in recent times the world over. And that's related to climate change, which has a very large anthropogenic component. So man-made factors cannot be easily excluded from them, but it is probably true that the Uttarakhand disaster was more man-made than the Orissa cyclone. And I think the causes need to be analyzed carefully, and, the lessons should be, digested sooner rather than later. So the sort of glacial melt which led to the, bursting of the lakes, which caused the rivers to go into spate in Uttarakhand, that kind of thing has been happening in other parts of the country too. I mean, the Bihar Chief Minister, for instance, went for a flood inspection on his helicopter and came back to say that the drought was more serious than the flood. Now, does that make any sense? It makes sense only if you remember that floods can be caused not just by rainfall but by melting glaciers.
That's true.
And you can have melting glaciers at the same time that you have drought in the plains. And both the events might be related to climate change. So those kinds of things are happening now and are leading to some very, very paradoxical, realities emerging.
True. Yeah, that's true. So finally, I have one final question, and we'll wrap up this show for today. So, in your view, is it the globalization that has changed the thinking process of the people, or is it the people who have intentionally welcomed the globalization, thinking that it is more a development than ruining our resources? Hello, am I clear? What is your opinion on the is it the people who is the cause behind the globalization? Is it the think process of the people, or the globalization has forced the people to think that they are in the mode of development?
More the latter. Globalization has been planned and imposed by a handful of planners and decision makers, powerful policy elites, often dovetailed into business elites. Around the world, that has been the case. In no country have people democratically voted for globalization. Globalization is something which was imposed by elites everywhere in the world, because it suits their interests in the short term at least. So, and then when it starts having negative consequences, then you have to, somehow explain them away. And that's when you might think that, people can be made to believe that development can only happen under globalization, and this is the only kind of development possible. And so many people might come to believe that. But the facts are otherwise, and we have tried to show that through the documentation in the book, that policies around globalization were created for a whole set of interests which have very little to do with the masses of the people.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Aseem. Thanks a lot for coming on the NRI Samay. Do you have any final words to our listeners?
No, I think I've said everything. Thanks for taking the time to listen to me.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, mine too.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So this is it for now. In conversation with Professor Aseem Shrivastava, who has shared a lot about his research and has discussed ongoing improvements in the society and various dimensions of globalization. Bringing in a new concept of radical ecological democracy, he has shared valuable information, and I hope you have enjoyed it equally. Thank you for listening. To get more from our shows, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our page on Facebook and Twitter. Bye-bye.
Friends, if you liked today's show, please go to youtube.com/NRI Samay and click on the subscribe button. You will get notified every time we publish a new show. And you can also like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Google+.